Well, hello and welcome to my fireside chat on the 12 ACS, 12 Associated Clinical Signs, and we're up to number 12. So this is the final of the 12 Associated Clinical Signs. The disregard of court authority. Again, this is an extraordinarily common symptom feature of this pathology for reasons. And the research indicates that the Greenham, Childress, and Pruder up on ResearchGate 46 court-involved families. All 46 had the diagnostic indicators. All 46 had 5 or more ACS. 45 of the 46 had 8 or more ACS. ACS 12, disregard of court authority, was in 93% of the families. So pretty much all the families are showing this symptom feature. And what it is the allied parent or child, and oftentimes it's a child off that role reversal, number 10, that they put the child out front. So it's not me who's disregarding the court orders, it's the child who's disobeying court orders. And so they put the child out in front to be able to nullify the court's authority. So the disregard of authority is a characteristic feature of narcissistic, psychopathic, borderline dark personality pathology. This spectrum of personality pathology does not recognize the right of authority to limit their behavior. That personality pathology recognizes only power. So if you have the power to compel them, ACS1, forced, if you have the power to compel them, then they'll do what you want. If you don't have the power to compel them, then they're going to do whatever they want. They have the power. So they see everything in terms of power, ACS1, rather than cooperation, rather than socially regulated behavior. So this spectrum of personality pathology does not recognize the right of authority to limit their behavior, and they feel entitled. We're entitled to disregard any discomforting limits or rules placed upon them. The disregard of judicial authority by the allied parent or child or anyone prominently suggests narcissistic, psychopathic, borderline dark personality parent or pathology in the allied parent, manifesting in the child's defiance of court orders. Now, I've worked juvenile justice. Okay, so I've worked with kids on probation. And when a kid's put on probation, and if they violate it, they go back into detention. And I like that because if they violate probation and they get away with it, then my therapy comes to an end. How am I going to convince the child that they have to toe the straight and narrow and they have to follow court orders and they can't go back and be with their old buddies again and things if they get to do it and there's no consequences for it? The court doesn't enforce their orders. So when there's court orders, as a therapist, I'm using those to help my kid learn how to regulate relative to authority. And if the court doesn't enforce their orders, then my therapy it undermines my therapy. In addition, I am really disturbed by teaching children a value system that it's okay to disregard court orders. I would consider a child neglect diagnosis on that. So child neglect diagnosis I'll consider on medical neglect, educational neglect, feeding, just basic needs kind of neglect, housing kind of neglect. I would consider, if you're teaching your child to disregard court authority, that's in this neglect zone on things. So, like if I was working juvenile justice and I had a kid on probation and I had the parent just saying, he doesn't have to listen to probation, I'm considering a neglect diagnosis against that parent for not supporting the child's proper development of socially organized values. So, but this is a concerning, and what you'll see on this one, the piece to recognize is not only the frequency, and it's always going back to court and all those sorts of things because they're entitled and they just disregard what limits placed on them. But what you'll see is the child will be placed out in front. So it's the role reversal. It's the child who doesn't want to go, and they get out of responsibility for their obligations as a parent to teach the child, you need to go on court orders. So This really needs to be addressed by the court system. They need to follow up with their court orders. The reason they don't is because the pathological parent is presenting a child protection issue to the court. And the court gets a little tentative if they don't know where the child protection issue is. They don't want to force the child to be with an abusive parent. And so they back off a little bit of their orders when it's the child who's disregarding their court orders rather than overtly the parent. But I would say we need to get confidence to the court about who's the abusive parent, and then the court needs to enforce their orders. But it's going to require that initial confidence. So in all cases of court-involved family conflict surrounding child custody, attachment pathology by the child, we need to get a proper risk assessment for child abuse to the differential diagnosis for each parent, because we need to be acting. We need to either restore the bond with the targeted parent with certainty and motivation, which case we need to be confident and reassured that that's not an abusive parent, or we need to protect the child from the targeted parent because that targeted parent is an abusive parent. But one way or the other, we're either protecting the parent from the targeted parent or the allied parent. The moment we put abuse on the table as a considered diagnosis in this context, we got a two-person differential diagnosis of which parent is producing the pathology. So with that, I'm going to close up on the 12 ACS. With ACS 12, the disregard of court authority, I would recommend to the court that, or I would suggest to the court to be mindful of potential manipulation by narcissistic, borderline, dark personality parents who are inducing and producing pathology in the child as a means of manipulating the court's decisions. And from a psychological perspective, that's a factitious disorder, and it's a persecutory delusion, cross-generational coalition, child psychological abuse, all of that from a pathological point of view. From the court's perspective, it is using the child's pathology to manipulate the court. And the court can't allow that to happen because then you're participating in the child abuse. But in order to not do that, the court needs to be reassured about which parent is abusing the child. Are there child protection concerns? Forensic psychology has never provided that information for the court. And so we need to, in forensic psychology, we need to get the court proper information on which to make its decisions. I recommend that the diagnostic checklist and the 12 associated clinical signs, parenting practices rating scale for the targeted parent be routinely collected. I don't care if people agree with me, disagree with me, it doesn't really matter. Just check, and provide that information to the both litigants, to the court, to the therapist. Let's everyone get clarity on what the symptoms are. And if you see 3 diagnostic indicators, a factitious attachment pathology, diagnostic indicator 1, personality disorder pathology being displayed by the child, diagnostic indicator 2, fingerprints of control, and a persecutory delusion being displayed by the child, it's really a 1-symptom diagnosis, number 3. If you see all 3 of those, it's child psychological abuse. There's your diagnosis right there on the 3 diagnostic indicators. In addition, you're going to see like 7, 8, 9, 10 of these associated clinical signs that show up nowhere else. They don't show up with ADHD or autism or eating disorders or substance abuse or depression, anxiety. These ACS show up nowhere in child psychology or anywhere. You will see a lot of them show up with this pathology because the pathology is pattern. And so we have, if you look at it one direction, you'll see the personality pathology. If you change the pathology and you look at another direction, you will see the family systems, the cross-generational coalition. If you flip it another way, you will see the factitious attachment pathology. If you flip it another way, you will see the persecutory delusion. And no matter which way you're looking at it, we will see the same thing. It's a coherent constellation of patterns of symptoms. If you open it up, look inside, you will see a bunch of associated clinical signs. When you have the whole thing, there's only one explanation, and that will provide the confidence to move forward in taking the child protection steps necessary. So with that, good luck to everybody out there, and take care.